Hello everyone. Welcome to a Secrets of Eventide stream. The occasional Saturday stream where I take a look at some of the secrets and behind the scenes stuff for the campaign, for the Eventide campaign. I haven't been doing these as often as I'd like, primarily because I haven't been developing a lot of brand new content, so there hasn't been an awful lot for me to talk about. But I have realized that I've gotten to a point where I need to do some revisions to some elements of the player's guide. And that seemed like a great opportunity to sit down and chat with all of you about how that process works and what it looks like to revise a class. So I'm talking about the Penumbrist here. This is a brand new class for the Eventide setting, designed kind of specifically tailor-made to the world and the setting itself. The big thing in the world is that the primal magic is pretty much gone and occult magic is kind of ascendant, while arcane and divine are on uneasy footing. So having a new occult spellcasting class was both a good way to balance out the loss of options, in that, Druid isn't an available option, so I wanted to replace it with something that was a bit more world-specific and something that really kind of made more sense for the setting. I did the same with the gnome and then putting in the gloamling. Right? So in both cases, whenever I had to take away a big content piece, I wanted to make sure I put something in that kind of fit the bill, or at least gave, players more interesting options. So instead of the setting just taking things away, it also added things as well. So, if you're not familiar with the Penumbrist, you can go to minotaurgames.com, make sure it's linked into your Patreon, and if you go into the player content in classes, you can look at the Penumbrist. The current draft of it is up there. Now, I've been playing with this class for a while. I've had two players play around with the class. One has since left my group, so I currently only have one. But it has given me a fair bit of insight just on the playtesting with the two of them about where the class was kind of falling short. And I'm going to walk through those here today as I talk about what I think is going to be the path forward for this class. So, at its heart, this is an occult spellcasting class. It's a full spellcasting class. It's not just got a handful of focus spells. It doesn't reduce the number of spells you get or anything like that. And as a result, that does kind of limit my overall design space, right? One thing that I think folks have caught on to in Pathfinder 2e is that if your class is a full spellcasting class with all the bells and whistles, the other stuff you get is a little bit more limited in scope. And that's primarily because spells are such a big component of your character. They give you so many different tools and weapons and tricks in your bag that there isn't a lot of room left mechanically to add a whole bunch of extra things to the class. So the best thing to compare the Penumbrist to is frankly the Bard. They're both occult spellcasting classes. They both get a full suite of abilities, and then they get some other things as well. So that's kind of where the start is here. Unlike the Bard, this is an intelligence-based class, and it, hit point-wise, it's the same as the Bard, right? If you look at its initial proficiencies, trained in perception, trained in, fortitude, reflex, expert, and will, skills, it's got occultism, 2 skills from its calling, and then a number of additional skills equal to 2 plus it's an odd. So it's not set up to be a hugely skilly class, but it does end up being a pretty skilly class just because int is its primary stat. So it can very easily start out with 9 trained skills. And I actually am starting to think that may be a bit much. I may want to ramp that back a hair, just so that the class isn't quite so skilly. That's a word. I made it up. We're going to work with it. As far as attacks go, it's trained in simple weapons. It doesn't have martial. Has light armor. and unarmored, but that's pretty par for the course for a full spellcaster. And that's kind of the initial setup. So there's a few things that's interesting here. One is, this is an occult class that doesn't have a spell book or spells known. It doesn't have a spell repertoire. It is a prepared spellcasting class. But it can prepare any occult spell on the list. So in that way, it's like a cleric, right? So it can prepare any occult spell. It doesn't need to know them, doesn't have a book, doesn't have a familiar it puts them in or anything like that. And that's pretty powerful. That is a buoy up in its favor. However, I've found that in play, just like with clerics, most casters kind of develop a list of spells that they have, and then they don't mess around with that. They just leave it. Change it now and again, especially when they realize, oh, maybe I should have a soothe or two, right? That does happen, but it's not as prevalent. So what is the kind of main focus of this class? So if you look at all of its abilities, most of its abilities are pretty straightforward stuff. You know, skill increases, save increases, stuff like that. But there is kind of one main track of bonus stuff that this class gets outside of feats, and that is its calling and how that relates to motes. So calling is when you first became a Penumbrist, something started talking to you from the darkness, and the nature of that voice, what it sounds like, what its tenor is, kind of determines some of your starting abilities. So there are 3 different voices you can choose from in here, but that doesn't mean all Penumbrists who are listening to the Jester are all listening to the same Jester, right? It's just saying some of the voices like to make dark, twisted jokes. Some are just angry and snarling, and some are whispers and talk about secrets. So there's 3. Now, each one of these gives you a focus spell, right? So this is the source of your focus spell. That's pretty standard. I don't think that's a thing I would change. Each one gives you 2 skills that you're trained in. In addition, each one gives you something you can do with your motes. So what are motes? Motes is this other ability you get that says, whenever you cast a spell that is either a darkness spell, a negative spell, a shade spell, or a shadow spell, you generate a mote, and the mote just starts floating around. And if you do another one the next round, you get a second mote, and eventually you can add 3. You can have a maximum of 3 motes. And if you don't cast one of those spells, or you want to use one of those abilities, your motes kind of fade away. So if you had 2, and then the next round you don't do anything, it fades down to 1. Now, in addition, you get some bond abilities that bond you stronger and stronger to the voice of your calling. And as you do so, your motes start doing things for you. So at first level, you get the first bond that just says whenever you have motes, you're concealed. And then at, let's see, you're at 9th level, you get the second bond that says, that doesn't have anything to do with motes. It just says whenever you cast a spell with the darkness, negative shade, or shadow trait, some of that magic heals your wounds, restoring a number of hit points equal to the spell's level. So you regain hit points every time you cast one of these spells. And then the third bond says that is at 17th level, you're now immune to bleed, and your dying threshold is increased by 1 step. But if you die, you can't come back under any circumstances. So that's mostly it. Now, motes kind of give you that one little base ability at first level, but in addition to that, each of the voices has a mote ability that says you can spend your motes as a free action before you make a certain type of check, and you spend all the motes in it, and you get a bonus equal to the number of motes you have, 1, 2, or 3. So the Jester says you can spend your motes on a will saving throw or an acrobatics or performance skill check. The Snarler says you can spend it on a fortitude saving throw or an athletics or intimidate skill check. And the Whisperer says you can spend it on a reflex saving throw or a diplomacy or a stealth skill check. So, I want to start by talking about those abilities and kind of what I've seen in play. And I don't want to spend too much time focusing on feats. Why? Because feats tend to be pretty discreet and they're pretty easy to kind of gauge if they're doing what they're supposed to be doing. Now, there are some that I think we will talk about as part of this chat. But I really want to kind of talk about this core mechanic and how, frankly, it's not working the way I want it to. So, in play, the motes have been a thing that, frankly, have been almost entirely forgotten by both of my players. And I've come to realize why. They're forgotten because they're too tricky to proc. They're too tricky to get going, right? So they require you to use a cast a spell with the darkness, negative shade, or shadow trait. And there's not as many of those as you might think. So, the game has some of those things, right? Darkness and shadow spells. There's a bunch, but they're not omnipresent. There isn't a good cantrip for it, and there just really isn't a way to use it consistently. So that's problem one. Problem one is getting motes just doesn't work consistently. So that's a bit of an issue. The second thing is that burning your motes. So once you have motes, you're concealed against anything that doesn't have low light vision or dark vision, because you count as concealed from the first bond. But the problem with that is most monsters have dark vision, so it doesn't really do anything. So it's hard to get, and it doesn't really do anything. So that's a problem. And then its final ability is you can spend them on these checks. Okay, well, let's take a closer look at those checks. Okay, so Jester, all of them have a saving throw. That's obvious, but not a thing you can control. It's a thing that happens to you. Not bad, but not optimal. And then each also has one of two skill checks you can do. Acrobatics and performance, athletics or intimidate, diplomacy or stealth. There's a problem with almost all of those. The first list, acrobatics and performance. Well, acrobatics is a thing you might do with some frequency. But performance is a very specific thing. Now, understand that you only get to spend it when you have the motes. So, you're going to go up and do a performance for the crowd, and before that, you're going to cast 3 darkness spells to give yourself a bonus? That doesn't make any sense, right? Maybe you're going to make a performance check in the middle of combat? You're not a bard. There aren't a lot of abilities to give you anything to do with that. If you look at the Jester feats, they do have a first level feat they can take called Dark Humor. That is a free action that says you begin to tell an infuriating or embarrassing joke about one creature that turns into a spell. If the next action you use is to cast a spell that has 1 or more targets, you can make a performance skill check to demoralize one target of the spell that you were using in Intimidate skill. If the check succeeds, the frightened condition applies before any saving throw or attack roll is made. If the check fails, the target gets a +2 circumstance bonus to AC against any attack made by the spell or on any saving throw made against the spell. Feats that modify the effects of your demoralized checks do not apply to them. So basically what's saying is you can attempt to demoralize someone with a performance check. So there is a way built into the class, but you have to take it. And if you don't take it, it doesn't work, right? Oh, you know what? Actually, the Jester gives this to you for free. So the Jester gives it to you for free, so that is the place where you get to use it. But I honestly don't necessarily think that this is the sort of thing you're going to use all that often. Now, I think that this feat does give you some good opportunities to use it, but you really have to line it up the right way. So that's the challenge I see with this over and over and over again, is that even if they were remembering it, they wouldn't really have a good use case for it. So Snarler is athletics or intimidate check. Okay, you know, intimidate is obviously there. You know, you can definitely use it to make an intimidate check, but athletics again is situational. So the problem with these is that you can burn your motes for a bunch of bonuses, but the bonuses are not often in your control. The final one has diplomacy in it. I don't even know how you would use diplomacy. Most diplomacy checks take 10 minutes to make or something. So I don't even know how that's even possible, and its feat doesn't even relate to diplomacy, right? The whisper calling has walk in shadow. Its special thing is that if you're in an area of dim light, you can spend an action and you may take a single stride action moving up to your speed. If you spend the entire time in an area of dim light, you ignore difficult terrain, treat greater difficult terrain as only difficult terrain, and do not trigger reactions from your movement. If for any reason your movement enters an area of bright light or darkness, you immediately stop, losing any remaining movement. So basically just lets you kind of sneak your way past folks. Cool. Has nothing to do with your motes or anything, unlike Dark Humor, which clearly does. Now, Snarler has a lash out thing, which is a reaction that allows you to strike out at people when they critically hit you. Again, useful. Has nothing to do with the motes. So what I'm getting at here is that the motes, the implementation of the motes isn't right. There's something about it that is fundamentally unsatisfying. Now, I think there is another thing in here too, which is the voices are giving you too much. So what they give you right now is they give you 2 trained skills, they give you a feat, a spell, and a mote ability. That's an awful lot. Like that's approaching sorcerer level. Here's a bucket of things based on your bloodline. It's a lot, and the mote ability is complicated as well. So I feel like this class both needs some simplification and some streamlining. It's a little dense right now in what it can do. I don't hate it. I don't think it's broken. It just, the use case for some of its abilities are pretty tough. So the way that I think this can evolve, first of all, I think generating motes just needs to be them drawing upon occult power. That's it. And maybe the answer there is to say every round when they cast an occult spell, period, they are drawing upon the powers of shadows and they generate a mote. And maybe if they actually cast a darkness, a negative, or like one of the spells that was on the list before, they get 2. They get to jump up the list. It still prevents them from getting to max bonus in one round, because you can say that they only generate motes once per round, no matter, even if they do cast a 2-action spell and a 1-action spell. You could still just say, yep, once per round they can generate motes. So I think that would make it much more clean in determining how they get motes. Now the next thing is a little bit more tricky, is how can they then use these motes? Now I did have a thought early on in the design that they could use the motes to cast focus spells once they had all 3. But that was way too powerful. It just gave them the ability to do their focus spells pretty, especially if I'm looking at the change that I'm thinking about, which is making it easier to generate motes. So then it has to be, well, what can you use motes for? So when I'm balancing a class, when I'm trying to figure out how am I going to make this class kind of fit and be a fun thing to play at the table, I oftentimes have to think about it from the angle of what's the cadence of the class? How does it cycle through combat? It's not about one round necessarily. It's about how does it play through a combat that is 3 or 4 rounds? What's its first turn look like? What's its second turn look like? What's its third turn look like? What's its fourth turn look like? And I like a character class that has a good arc within several rounds of combat. If combat stretches beyond that, then you're kind of in the wild blue yonder. But most combats go about 4 rounds. So if a combat's going to go about 4 rounds, if it's a moderate encounter, that means I need to make sure that the character can set up whatever cool thing they're going to do, have it pay off, and have all that happen on round 3 or 4, right? Preferably 3, maybe 4. 4 can be an acceptable spot, but it is tricky because it means that you do have a higher chance of the combat just ending before it gets to you. And then, oh, cool, I was going to do this cool thing, but instead I just did nothing. Oops. Right. So, if I'm going to do that, I already have something built in here that might work, which is moat, use moats, get something cool, right? That seems like a good path to go, but looking at what it has a bunch of things that are not very active. They're skill bonuses, which is fine, but like it could be better, right? And it almost makes me think that the first level feat they get for free, maybe all of those need to speak to moats directly. So, Dark Humor is like, yeah, it's a free thing you can use, but it's better when you have more moats, right? That's a possibility. That is one direction I could take. Is that, Dark Humor, you're making this check and you get a bonus based on how many moats you have. And, it could be the sort of thing where, how frightened they get is based on how many moats you have, right? So, it could be the sort of thing where, you can only use this when you have at least one moat. And when you use it, that's how frightened they get. Now, giving someone Frightened 3 from a first level feat is very powerful. I want to be clear on that. It's very powerful. That is a very strong effect. But the only way to get there is to spend multiple rounds building up moats to do it. So you're kind of spending the time setting it up, but it's important to realize that from a balance perspective, you're getting the moats for free on top of the spell, which was good already, right? Casting spells is already a good thing. And if this is going to be able to happen off of cantrips, that means that this is totally within the player's control and they can just do it whenever. So there is that. And that is a thing that needs to be considered. Now, I do still like the ability of like, hey, you're making a saving throw, you have moats. You can burn the moats to get a bonus on the saving throw. And that's fine. I think that's a fine use of the ability. So looking at these, yeah, that's just kind of what I'm trying to figure out. Right now, they both give you 2 trained skills. That may be too many trained skills. I may need to ramp that back down to 1, which would also remove them giving bonuses from the mode ability as well. I definitely want to take that down to 1. The reason why they're 2 and 2 is because it doesn't make much sense if you're not trained in the skill that your mote thing would give you a bonus in. But this class can easily end up with 9 trained skills at first level, which is a bit much, a bit too much, to be honest. So, yeah, I think the answer here is allowing you to get moats more reliably, and then allowing you to have something you can concretely spend the moats on. That should probably be a feat and not a focus spell. It should have nothing to do with the spells themselves, because they're being generated by the spells, but they shouldn't perhaps affect the spells. So I think that's the way to treat this, is that the feat that you get is a feat that burns moats. And that means looking at these, so Dark Humor currently is a thing that works off spells. That might need to be a thing where you expend your moats making a joke at someone else's expense, and layer the frightening condition on them. And this may be a thing that then takes an action. Lash Out is a just kind of burn your moats for an attack. Currently, that is a reaction to you being critically hit. I almost think this might want to be a kind of mote strike thing, and the Snarler then becomes the class that burns its motes on a melee attack. And then if I look at Walk in Shadow, this is the one that allows you to kind of move around in the darkness. This could be the sort of thing where your motes allow you to basically just shadow jump short distance. So if you have motes, you can kind of bounce from one spot to another, and maybe the target's flat-footed or something on the other side. Gives you that. That does mean that this class is going to really want to find a way to get some sneak attack, but we'll see. So these things go up as well, right? And maybe there is something in there where at higher levels, the Whisper gets sneak attack from a higher level feat. Maybe. Not sold on that. I think keeping this away from the rogues kind of bucket is probably the right call. But, boy, it sure does feel like it wants something. So another thing I want to look at here are, I do want to talk about the... There's a lot here, right? I mean, obviously it has feats that go all the way up to 20. All of these are going to need to be reevaluated, especially when it comes to some of the higher level ones that allow you to do things with. So, because there are higher level abilities, right? If you look at like feat 12, slashing shadows, you direct your shadow motes to swirl around you, harming those who draw too close until the end of your next turn. The motes orbit you in a frenzy, making you concealed to any creature with low light vision or dark vision. Additionally, adjacent creatures that hit you with a melee attack, as well as those creatures that touch you or hit you with an unarmed attack, take 2d6 negative damage. Each time they do, the negative damage increases by 1d6 at 16th and 20th level. Using this ability expends your motes, and you cannot form any new ones until you... So, there's already some of these abilities floating around in here. It's just at low levels, which is all I've been playing up to this point. It doesn't quite work the way I want it to. So, there is that. Now, another thing I wanted to talk about here are the spells. I think there's a spot in the spells that aren't quite working out the way I want. So, if I hop down into spells, the focus spells for the Penumbrist, again, I've got some that work and some that don't. And I'm really looking mostly here at the first level focus spells because I don't have playtest data on the higher level ones. Black Blade is the Snarler one. That one works kind of fine. You just basically summon a blade that deals negative damage. That's pretty useful because it bypasses a lot of stuff and it doesn't... and it scales, right? And... I don't think my group has gotten to the point where it scales up to 2d6. That'll happen at 5th level. They're only at 3rd right now. But it is still a useful thing to do. But they're kind of at the point now where it's not the most useful thing to do. It lasts a minute. It feels like this is the sort of thing where the Black Blade should also get a bonus to damage. Oh, it adds your int modifier to damage, which is super useful. As well. So maybe it's fine. Maybe it's fine. I do worry that I'm like, well, at the level you're currently at, it could be better, but it's not quite there yet. So then there's Laughing Gloom, and this one really, I don't think works very well. It is a sustain spell, which is already a pain in the ass, and just creates a area of creepy, unnerving laughter emanating from an area of darkness or dim light. Creatures within 30 feet take a -1 penalty on saving throws against fear and a -2 penalty on perception. That's not very good. Not for a sustained spell. I mean, the penalties aren't bad, but, it then requires you to do other things that rely on fear, honestly, the weird thing about giving them penalties on perception checks, I like it from a thematic sense, but I don't actually think it does what I want it to do. So there's part of me that thinks that this should be a AoE kind of frighten effect that then also comes with a perception penalty, and move it away from just giving a penalty on fear saves and just jump straight to the fear. And as a focus spell that is sustained, that might be balanced. I need to take a peek at... Matter of fact, while I'm here, this is the sort of thing that I would do. I would look up the Fear spell for Pathfinder 2, right? Fear is a first level spell. Targets one creature, will save. The duration it varies based... It lasts as long as it lasts because the frightened condition falls off you. So, you know, and it can be... Critical failure is frightened 3 and fleeing for 1 round. So, failure is frightened 2, success is frightened 1. So, and once you get up to 3rd level, you can target up to 5 creatures. So this could be inherently better, but you could also just treat it as a flat frightened 1 if they fail their save while they stay in the area, and the perception thing happens no matter what, right? So that might be the way to go. That as long as they stay in the area, they're frightened 1, and the moment they're out, the frighten will bleed off at whatever rate it bleeds off at. So that might work. That might be balanced. It is a bit powerful, but it also is very thematic. And then the last one in here is the Whisper one. This is Shadow Veil. You draw a veil of shadow around you that grants you protections. This grants you concealment against any creature that cannot see in darkness, although your position is still obvious and you cannot use the hide. You gain a +2 status bonus on saving throws and AC against light effects, although after the saving throw or attack resolves, this spell ends. Again, not very good, right? Especially considering Shadow Veil is for the Whisper, right? And Whisper, right? The moment you have motes, you already gain the benefits of that spell. So that's one of the other problems, is right. So motes. These motes, these motes do not obscure sight, but as long as you have motes, you are treated as if you are in dim light, granting you the concealed condition to any creature lacking the ability to light. So you cast the thing that gives you the mote, and now that you have the mote, you gain the ability that you got from the spell. So it's just duplicating in a way that, frankly, the first time I wrote this, I just didn't realize. So this is where I'm at. I just got to take apart a number of these pieces and put them back together. And I think, you know, taking the Whisper, and it all comes back to the callings and their theme, right? So I think that's the way to treat this. You've got 3. The Jester should be all about, you know, enraging people and mocking and basically dropping status penalties. That should be the Jester's, right? The Snarler should be all about lashing out and attacking people. This is the more combatant version of the Penumbrist. And then the Whisperer feels like it should be all about buffing themselves and giving themselves mobility and the ability to move around the battlefield. But it still feels like it's missing a little something, right? I think the case for the Jester is obvious. And it works. I think that's the one that drops effects on other people. Negative effects. I don't want any aspect of this class to feel like the Bard, in that I don't want it to give benefits to other members of the party. That's not what this class should do. It should give penalties to enemies, attack enemies, or maybe give some bonuses to itself. So having the Whisperer be the class, or be the track of this that is more defensive in nature, maybe is interesting. There may be something there that can then evolve into bonus precision damage, or maybe this is the one that drops bleed effects on people. That might be interesting, like damage over time. It's not, the Snarler's about big hits, whereas the Whisper's about draining you out. That might be interesting. There may be something there. That might be the companion piece. Because if I look at it right, the Snarler should be about, you know, cranking up your own kind of rage and your physicality. The Jester is all about manipulation, and so I'm trying to think of their backup theme, right? So if the Jester is dropping bad status effects on people, it should also be about manipulating their actions and just kind of screwing with the people around you. The Snarler should be about big physicality, being able to take hits, because if they're going to be dealing hits, they need to be able to take them. And kind of lashing out with darkness. And then the Whisperer is about being stealthy, being sneaky, and just slowly bleeding you out, right? I think that might work. That might be the path I take this. I'm literally workshopping this as I go here, folks. Because I've opened this up and stared at it a bit, but I haven't really come up with good solutions yet. So that does mean I'd need to reevaluate, well, frankly, all of these feats. A bunch of them are obvious, right? There's no reason I would change Reach Spell or Shadow Familiar. But looking at the other feats that are floating around in here, there are definitely some that probably need some adjustment or need a different twist. So, yeah. Right, like the Snarler already has a rage ability, which, you know, basically they get a dark rage umbral spell that puts them in rage similar state. A lot of them have at 6th level they all have a feat that gives them another rage or number spell, a focus spell, and increases their number of focus points. Yeah. I feel like that's the way to go. That's probably going to be the way to develop this class. And I think that, frankly, all of them are halfway there already. Like, yeah, they all already have some of the abilities built in. I think I'm just going to have to recall. And it's going to involve moving things away from abilities that, frankly, aren't just kind of functioning. Right? Like making diplomacy checks with Mo. I don't even know how you do that. Most of the... If I look at... Diplomacy... It's society. So, you know, gather information is an exploration thing. Make an impression is an exploration thing. Request is the only thing you could use it on, but request is something you use on a friendly or helpful creature, which means it's probably not a combat thing. Could be, but probably isn't. So the challenge here is that diplomacy is like, oh hey, you can get a diplomacy with your moats, but a bonus to diplomacy, but when are you ever going to have moats when you need to make a diplomacy? And they can't even stick around that long. So I just need to go in and reworkshop things. Looking at the core other pieces of the class, I feel like most of those are going good shape. I don't really feel like the initial proficiencies need to change except for skills, because I think it's getting too many. I think it should get occultism, 1 skill from its calling, and then 2 plus in. That's kind of the minimum number I can give it. It obviously has to have occultism, that just makes sense. And I just need to ramp down the skills from the calling down to 1. And that's fine. None of its attacks or defenses. I don't really feel like changing its defenses. Like, it does. This isn't a class that needs medium armor. I don't think. I think I could find a way for the Snarler to give you medium armor if I wanted to. But I don't have to. Obviously, the spell casting, there's nothing I would change about that. It's a pretty standard progression spellcaster. Most of the other things it gets, things like Resolve and Armor Expertise and stuff like that, are things that I wouldn't touch. They're mapped pretty tightly in the system, and they work just fine. So, really, the primary area of revision is just around moats and getting moats to work. Because I think if moats work with calling the way that I want them to, then all of this kind of snaps into place. Yeah. That's why I'm at. Tricky. My playtest data on this has been, I wouldn't say limited, right? I mean, my groups are 3rd level now, and you know, I've been seeing Penumbrist play the entire time. I think the number of times I've seen moats even mentioned is like. Because he just doesn't get them often enough, and even when he does, he forgets to use them. So I think that's where the change needs to happen. Is that moats need to become an automatic thing, and their value case needs to be a bit more obvious. Right now it feels like it's a little hidden. And I think part of that is the low-level feats don't really use them. The high-level feats do, but that's high level, right? Because if you look at the higher-level feats, you get things like, you know, growling moats. The moats that surround you take on brutal strength and can be used as weapons. You can make a moat melee attack. This attack deals 1d6 negative damage per level of your moats, so 1d6, 2d6, 3d6. And have the backswing and shove traits. If you score a critical hit with your moats, you can expend them to give the target persistent bleed damage equal to the moat bonus. That's a Snarler level 8 feat, right? Pretty cool. But not to level 8, right? The feats that the first feats that actually start burning moats or using moats directly don't come till a little later. I mean, hell, 8th might be the start of it. I'm looking here. I'm not seeing any at 6. No. Yeah, like the Whisper Calling Get Silent moats at 8 that allow you to that give you a bonus on stealth checks, your moat bonus without having to spend them. And it gives those bonuses to adjacent creatures. Like, I like these feats. It's not that I don't like them. It's that they're coming too late. And I don't know that I can give that feat at first level. It's too powerful, right? Being like, yeah, here, you can have, hey, you got 3 moats, congrats, you can now hit for 3d6 at first level. That's ridiculous. Way too powerful. It could be the sort of thing where you have to spend the moats to make that attack, and then maybe it works. Maybe. I mean, it's not unusual for classes to take a few levels to come together. But I do think it's an important aspect of the design space to look at a class and understand the ways in which it's not performing at low levels in a way that it will at later levels. So there's this problem. We had to find a lot of different ways to solve it throughout Pathfinder. If a class starts out having to do a different thing, and then 3 levels later it all snaps together and they're able to be the character they want to be, that should only really happen because they have some archetype plan or they have some convoluted character concept that they want to get to, but they know they can't have it right away. The core class conceit should not do, right? So if it'd be like, oh, congrats, you're a wizard, but you don't get any spells until 3rd level. You just don't get any, right? I mean, think about if you go back to Pathfinder, 1st edition, and you had some classes that didn't get spells until later. Or sorry, I guess you have to go back to 3.5 for this. But like Rangers didn't get spells till 4th level. You couldn't really say I'm going to build a spell Ranger because you don't get any spells until. That's weird. So the challenge here is that if it does all these cool things with moats, but not until 8th level, then you're kind of playing a different character until 8th level. And then all of a sudden you snap into place. It's like having to, let's say you were going to go that Snarler route, and you had to sink a bunch of points into strength and con, even though at low levels they weren't really serving you very well, and you're actually a full spellcaster, right? You get some attribute diffusion and some focus drift. Would there be a way to keep some of these effects to be used out of combat? I mean, maybe. So the question is, there's another aspect of this, is that the moats show up and bleed away very quickly. And part of me is doing that so that you don't do dumb counterintuitive things to always have 3 motes on you when you enter combat. Right? So if it's like, oh, I have to cast a cantrip every round to keep these up and running, that means you're walking through the dungeon casting a cantrip every round, which is weird. If they last longer, that problem becomes less silly, but is still present, right? Oh, they last 10 minutes, so that's fine. I'm just going to, take it easy for 10 minutes. I just realized. Document. All right, anyway. So yeah, I don't know. It's tricky. I think that's where I'm at right now, is that I need to either, if motes are going to be a combat thing, then that's what their entire focus should be on that, and not about what kind of minor skill bonus can they give you outside of combat. If I want you to have that minor skill bonus outside of combat, I should just give it to you through some other way. Yeah. So, folks, that's where I'm at here today. I want to thank you all for hanging out with me as I walk through this process. I don't have any solutions quite yet. I'm still working on pieces of it. But I do think that this has helped me kind of start unpack the problem and look at ways that I might fix it. And I do think that making motes a more central aspect of the class, because it is really kind of their thing, and tying that directly into their calling and making that be a unique expression, that is kind of the path to take on this. It does mean that the 3 different paths of Penumbrist will all be kind of similar. So I am going to want to look at ways to kind of diversify that. Like, maybe you can focus your feats on one aspect or another, and at least give you some choice and option in that. But that is the tricky part. But you see that in others as well. Like the bard with, like, oh, here are the 3 paths. Well, if you're on that path, you're going to look similar to other bards on that. All right. Well, I have another stream starting up here in just about 10 minutes, so I'm going to go ahead and let this stream come to an end. Folks, I want to thank you for coming by. Thank you for hanging out. For those of you, by the way, up at the highest tier, you have been earning word credit with me. I'm going to do an update on that here soon and tell everyone what their word balance is so that folks can maybe order some words from me. So look out for that. I think that's for Lord tier only. Lord tier folks build up 100 words worth of credit for me per month. And as a result, some folks have like over 1,000 words worth of credit, which is enough to get like an archetype or a monster or lots of stuff. So we should talk about that. All right, folks, that's all I have here today. Thank you for watching. We will see you next time.